Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I know I've been gone a few days, but like all of us, it's nice to take some R&R. But I am back with a new guest to showcase here on the channel, and one I am very excited to share with you all. Now, my guest today was born and raised in Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, and moved to the United States 2 decades ago. Her decision to relocate was driven by love as she followed the one and only person who held her heart. Now living in Dallas, Texas with her husband, her teenage son, and a dog and a cat, she now works in the IT industry. And while she never had plans of becoming a writer nor studied to become a writer, during her childhood, she developed a strong passion for literature, particularly science fiction, fantasy, and related genres. The public library became her second home, where she would lose herself for countless hours in captivating stories written by Asimov and Bradbury, King and Tolkien, Verne, Stevenson, and other sci-fi books she could get her hands on. And inspired by these literacy giants, her mind was crowded with stories of her own imagination. She always wrote stories in her head, inspired by these great books. She added her characters and came up with their adventures on her own. And her stories predominantly feature a courageous female protagonist with whom she associates herself with. Many years later, she found the courage to transition those stories from her thoughts onto paper. And her series, The Warriors of Mirral, offers readers a mix of sci-fi and fantasy with a little bit of romance. And it tells all about the 3 book series and more that may be coming up in this series or more. Let's give a huge round of applause the first time her here on the channel, author Katrina. Katrina, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Thank you, Gabriel, for having me here. And actually, kudos to you. You pronounced my name the right Russian name, Katerina, which
Oh,
is
that's perfect.
very, very awesome, actually. I'm very pleased. It's a funny quick segue from our meeting is when I just moved to United States, I thought, it's probably too long for people to pronounce. So I'm like, let me shorten it to make it Katrina. And just as soon as I did it, the Hurricane Katrina happened. So it was a very interesting coincidence. But anyway, I'm very happy to be here on your podcast.
Awesome, Katrina. It's so great to have you. And if you have not followed her on her social media, viewers and listeners, her books are really, really interesting. I'll give you a little teaser for the first book. The first book, The Queen of Nordern, is a fantasy romance story. It introduces the underlying concept that goes through all of her stories, a multiverse. It tells the readers that besides our own Earth, there is another world called Mirral, which is ultimately an alternative Earth. But it has magic there. The main protagonist of the book, a young girl named Alissa, lives in a city, works as an editor in a publishing agency, and dreams of something unique happening in her life. And one day she discovers she is a princess from another world and heir to the Northern throne. The book goes around her journey to that world, the decisions and sacrifices she has to endure, and of course, the ultimate choice she has to make. Now, there are 2 other books in the series, but I'm now going to turn over to Katrina to tell us more about the 2 books in her series.
Sure. So, interestingly enough, the first book that I started writing, the Queen of Nordern, originally it was a standalone story where ultimately I explored the idea of having a different world from which my main character Alissa was coming from, where they had magic. So certain people got magic in there, and the world itself is more of the kind of medieval type of the settings with brave knights and dragons and stuff. Uh, And then as soon as I finished my first book, I still have a lot of ideas and thoughts on how to expand that universe. So actually my second book, The Mage of Terra, it's happening in yet another world. And this world also we can call it parallel universe or alternative reality, whatever people prefer the term. But this happening in the world where space expansion happened a while ago. So it actually shifts the genre a little bit from fantasy to more of a space opera type of thing.
Right.
So in this world, there is pretty much the whole galaxy was terraformed, and people live in multiple planets. There is a rather big difference between the core planets, where everybody living in richness and abundance, and the outside of the core, the outer rim, where people just have to struggle to go by. And in this story, there is a story of a little group of people that are traveling. They don't live in the core; they live in outside world, outside planets, and they travel. And one day they encounter a girl with very strange abilities. She joins their crew, and they have adventures together. And eventually, by the middle of the book, the reader might see the connection to the initial story of Queen of Nordern. So I'm not going to tell more about that story. I kind of like how it segues and shows the connection. But then, as soon as I finished that second book, The Mage of Terror, there was an absolute need to put everything together. So that's how the Princess from Earth, the third installment, happened. And that actually also a little bit changed in the genre. It became more of the detective kind of story.
Ooh, okay.
And now we have three different worlds. We have the world of Mirral, which has magic. We have the world of Terra that has space. And finally, the third story happening on Earth, our own Earth, and where things get connected. And I really don't want to tell more, because that's kind of, there's a lot of this, turns and twists that hopefully get the readers as excited as it made me when I was writing it. But ultimately, this is a 3-book all connected. So I highly recommend, if whoever says to read it in a sequence, because that brings the most excitement while you're going through that.
Awesome. And I can definitely tell, going back to your bio, that reading and creating these worlds has been ingrained in your DNA since the beginning. So I am really curious. Now, in your bio, you said that you had these stories in your head and you made the decision to write them out and put them on paper. Can you tell us about that aha moment where you wanted to become a writer and author? And ultimately, when you made the decision, what was sort of like the need that you want to satisfy for yourself on this journey where you realize, if I'm going to do this, I need to do this the way I want it to be told. I want these stories to be told the way I want them to be.
Well, this is kind of a little bit of embarrassing moment to share, but my aha moment was my midlife crisis. As silly as it sounds, but it's true. About a year and a half ago, I just suddenly started thinking, okay, I mean, my life is great. I have wonderful family. I have interesting job, but yet there is a small piece of me that is missing. I'm not talking about, legacy or something, but just something I haven't really accomplished or realized. And as you mentioned, and as I said, I was writing those stories in my head, coming up with adventures and everything. So I decided one day, let me try just to start writing it up. It was just a sudden moment. I started typed couple of critical parts of the first story. Like, okay, let's write around it. So I continued. And honestly, I never planned to be a published author. I was just ultimately writing for myself. I'm writing, into my desk type of thing. So
Right.
nobody could get to read it. It was just for me. And one day my husband asked me, "What are you doing?" And I was a little bit embarrassed. I was like, well, there's certain stories in my head that I wanted to put in writing. And he got excited more than me. He's like, "Oh wow, I really want to read it." And he was my first beta tester. He read my first story, first novel, and he's the one who said, "Why don't you publish it? It's interesting. It has a interesting plot. It reads fairly easily. So why don't you try?" And I tried with the first one. It was not the easiest experience. That's something I can share later.
All
Trying to
right.
self-publish the first book. But when I've published the first book, I realized that I have so much more to share, so many more stories in my head, that I just continued going with the other books of my series. But yeah, ultimately the beginning was like, what have I done? Why can't by having it everything in my head and can just share with first of all with myself, and then eventually with the readers.
Nice. And also, I would say, Katrina, you do not have to feel embarrassed. I had another guest on the show who's also a parent who kind of gave a very similar story. Shout out to N Fire for this story. She said the reason she got into writing her stories, her aha moment is that her child, who wants to be an artist, was struggling. And she said, you can do it. You set your mind to it. And her child called her out on it, says, "Well, why don't you do what you want? Why don't you write?"
Nice.
So her child put her on the spot, and it's like, okay, well, shoot, I got to write my own story. And her story was actually published, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this month. So that is simply incredible. So she had to put her money where her mouth was. And so far, it's been great. And now, kind of leading off on that, so Katerina, when you began writing this story, what was your initial set of goals that you set out with? And when you decided to get beta readers and ARC readers to review your story before you decide to publish them, what was the feedback like?
Well, the first initial set, obviously, I'm writing for myself, right? So there was no really target audience or certain plan in my head. That was just, let me start writing. But obviously, I had a goal, and the goal is the book has to be interesting,
Mm-hmm.
logical. The sequence of the events, the motivation of the characters, it still has to have certain logic, right? Because
Right.
it has to be interesting. It has to be captivating. It has to ultimately hold people. And I'm my own beta tester, so I write it and I'm gonna reread it. Like, do I get a goosebumps? Do I get like, cool? What's gonna happen next? If I get that feeling myself, obviously, I'm going in the right direction. And then when I had my first beta testers, which is my husband, and I have another friend, my friend, she was absolutely amazing. So I sent her literally unedited copy, first version of my book, and I felt so good because after each chapter she would text me like, "Oh my god, that happened, what's going to happen next?" Or she would comment on certain actions of the characters or certain things. That was so motivating. So I mean, I'm very, very grateful to have friends like that, who actually was not only like, "Okay, I read your book, good book, fine," but actually you could tell that the person was really engaged, really interesting to hear what's happening, to read what's happening. So at that moment, ultimately, that's everything comes together, and you're like, okay, let's continue, let's keep going. Now it's, I want to continue the story. So it is not necessarily a goal, but it's something that I was trying to get to.
Nice. And that kind of leads into the next question. So as you said just now, you didn't necessarily have a set of goals in mind, specifically in the sense of, the target audience, who are you trying to write this for, but mainly you want to write a good story where it flows, it makes sense, the reader doesn't get confused. And from the feedback you got from your beta readers and ARC readers, did you believe at that point that their response validated your set of goals that you start off with on this journey of yours?
It absolutely did. And besides the positive feedback, the biggest and the most important one was, okay, what's going to happen next? I want to hear what's going to happen next. So, and that's kind of what pushed me and kept me going, because you're not just waiting for, yay, good job, because let's be honest, in many cases, if you're talking about your friends, if you're talking people who you know, most of them, even if they might not like it, they will probably try to, tell you like, that was good,
Right.
But not necessarily always you would get that constructive criticism. So, it was important for me to actually see, like, when the people giving me feedback, they show excitement, they show interest, they ask me like, okay, now I want to know what's happening next. Like, are you going to do something with these characters? What's going to happen? So, yeah, so it's kind of keeps developing to the point of, okay, I not only want to create an interesting story, I want to make sure that it will ultimately demand the continuation of that.
Right.
Although I'm thinking I said I finished my third book, but I already had several people asking. I'm like, okay, I mean, you put the end, you didn't put to be continued, you put the end at the end of the book, but there's probably a lot of more that you can write in this particular universe.
Definitely 100%. And that kind of leads into probably the first of many hard-hitting questions in the interview, which is, I'm sure you definitely agree, Katrina, that writing a book, especially a book that, we're passionate about writing, that we've had with us since the very beginning, putting that down on paper is not easy. As I said numerous times on the show, viewers and listeners, writing a book is not easy. It can take up to 5-10 years to get at least the first draft on page. And that's not even including the hours of revisions, finding an editor, finding a cover artist whose artwork and style matches what you imagine the world to be. Because, as we'll talk later, cover is important in the marketing business, as it will give readers and potential buyers a little glimpse into what your book could potentially be about. And then presenting it on the world stage, digital stage or physical stage, it's a 50-50 shot if your book's going to hit the target audience or not, and it's going to be the most popular thing in the target genre. And that, of course, leads into imposter syndrome, the voices in the back of our head that tell us that we shouldn't be in this field, that we've wasted 10 years of our life making something that's not going to be, read or picked up. So for you, Katerina, have you ever had those moments of imposter syndrome? And if not, what has continued to discipline you to tell this story? Because, in your opinion, this is a story that needs to be shared with the world.
That's a very interesting concept of feeling as an imposter. I didn't think until I listened to some of your podcasts and read your questions. So I'm like, that's a very interesting concept. Again, because I only recently started doing that. And again, I never really had the plans to become an author. I didn't feel it. And now, besides the fact that, I'm writing myself, I obviously read a lot. I started reading so much. Partially is to, improve my English. English is not my first language. So I'm constantly working on my language skills, but also to understand, what people write, what people like, what is the current genre that is, not just selling, but, captivates the interest of the readers. So when we are doing the hard work, and it is a hard work, right? You know, writing a book, just like you mentioned, it didn't take me long to write it, but it took me quite a bit to make sure that it's not only interesting per se, but again, because, you know, English is not my first language, I want people to read it and not to think like it's either somebody with not very good, you know, grammar knowledge or something wrote it. So obviously you have to work a lot on that. Not necessarily felt as an imposter, but the feeling of nobody would care about it, that appeared multiple times in multiple occasions, especially right now. And I probably would be happy to hear your opinion about that. But I got a little bit of feeling I'm too late to jump on that train. When we're talking about books, reading books, in our current environment of TikTok and short videos, where you can see more and more people losing that long attention span, right? When you read a book, you need to be in there. And instead, we have it replaced with 30 seconds videos, and you just swipe, and you don't really push your brain to work, right? And you realize that who's gonna read now? Like, nobody reads right now. So it is a little bit of turn down, right? Because when you're thinking, you know, instead of sitting, it doesn't matter, digital book, paper book, but people lose their interest on staying a long time on one task. It can be discouraging per se. So I honestly just keep in mind that, again, you know, this is not my primary profession. This is more just me wanting to share my stories, maybe captivate an interest in of 10 people, maybe 100, whatever would work. But ultimately, still, I'm doing it for me first. So this is, you know, my thing, my passion. I'm happy to share it, but that's nowhere gonna discourage me from doing it if that doesn't generate that much interest. I want it to happen. Of course, I wanted to capture as much interest of the readers as possible, but it's not going to be the breaking point of like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that anymore. Like, nobody buys my books, nobody wants to read it.
Definitely. And actually what you just brought up is something that we're actually going to be talking about a little bit later, which is the long-term goals of being an author, whether it is you want to be an author or want to be known as an author, because those are two very different mindsets with two very different goals, as well as benefits and outcomes / consequences. And that actually leads into a perfect segue into now the business side of being an author. So, Katrina, you mentioned earlier that your first book was self-published, if I'm not mistaken. So, for you, what sort of was the decision to say, okay, I'm going to publish this book so I can share it with new readers? Now, did you initially want to go the self-publishing route because it suited for you and where you're at in your life, or did you want to try your hand at the traditional publishing? And has that sort of have transferred over into your other two books and future books that you may be writing?
So ultimately, I self-published all three books, but with my first book, again, I was absolutely clueless. I was writing, and after my husband told me, like, why don't you try it? Why don't you publish? Again, Google is our friend. I went and I'm like, how do people publish books nowadays? Right? I had no idea about that Amazon printing on demand, self-publishing options. So I mean, I still like to call it a learning lesson. However, it's probably not the best lesson, but it was a lesson indeed. I found a ad for the publishing company that helps new authors to kind of go through that, and they appear to be very highly rated on the reviews, on Trustpilot and everything. So I decided to sign a contract with this company. They offered the services of editing, proofreading, cover creation, and publishing on Amazon and Ingram Spark. So I hired them. That was a hard experience because clearly company, they claim to be located in New York. They are not.
Oh, I know where this story is going. I've had a friend similar. If it's what what I'm thinking is that you're saying, I know exactly the outcome, but please continue.
Yes. So I will try to describe it as politically correct as possible. So every single step of the process was a complete nightmare. I had to chase people to do the editing. The editing definitely proved not to be a good one. I actually had to rehire them later on to redo my first book. So the editing was not okay. The cover was a nightmare because, you're given very simplistic instructions. Let's just say an example, a dark-haired man and a blonde girl next to him, dressed up in medieval costumes. Any AI can create it for you in a second. And still, whatever they were sending to me was a ridiculous stuff, mixing and change. So I actually took one of their templates and did it on the Face app. Your Face app on the phone that you can, change faces, apply features, make somebody from dark hair to blonde. So I did myself. So that was a tough one. Then publishing again was a tough one because I had to chase that company. They were clearly not located in the same part of the world as we are. So there was a time issue, definite language barrier and everything. So long story short, I published my first book. I kept an eye on how they were doing it. And from that point, I realized I only need a good editor separately, and I need somebody who would create me a good cover and put it in a specific Amazon format. Everything else I can publish myself. I learned the whole process. KDP is very easy as long as you have all the format and all the settings properly done. So the other two books I did myself. I still got ripped off on the money because this company also made me sign the marketing contract, promising me huge sales and everything. Clearly nothing happened. But and of course then they blocked me and never responded me on any questions. But lesson learned. I consider that amount spent as a good lesson learned because now I know I'm learning myself Amazon ads. I'm learning myself some of the promotional ways of trying to address your books. So anyway, anybody who is planning to publish a book and planning to become a self-published author, I strongly recommend not to go with those companies, or at least read the reviews and keep in mind that 4.8 reviews would probably still have several people like me who left a 1-star review just because they actually had a true experience versus the rest of the 5-star reviews that were clearly spoofed. So I recommend to maybe find a fellow author or talk to somebody who's done it on their own and get advice from them. I really, again, I don't want to talk bad about every single publishing company. No, I'm just sharing my own experience. Right. But my understanding is a lot of those companies do feed from the folks like myself who have no idea what to do and how to publish and take advantage of them. So yes, I recommend to do a little bit more reading. And there's absolutely nothing difficult on self-publishing through Amazon. It's a very, very straightforward process. You just need certain help. And for something that you cannot do, such as editing or cover creation, I just use the Upwork, and I hire separate contractors to do cover for me or editor for me. I found the good editor that did all my 3 books. I found an amazing voice actor who narrated all my 3 books, because I also have an audio version of those books. So there is definitely a different ways of doing it. So I suggest to do your own research before jumping to the company that promises you golden mountains and everything if you sign a contract with them.
Definitely, Katrina. And you actually just brought up something that I think a lot of new authors are definitely faced with. All these companies that say they could do everything, Amazon bestseller, millions of reviews, and so forth. If you've remembered, listeners, I mentioned this a while ago, early on in my YouTube days, year ago. I had a friend on the show, Kim Applegren, a fellow author, hailing from South Africa, detailing her experience. And she published at the time. She didn't do enough research, or the research that she was given was not the best, which was, I'm not going to say the name, but this was a vanity publishing house where she lost a lot of money, and she had to fight for the sole control of her book, to where she did win the rights back to her book. And then she republished the 2nd edition of her story, and she also self-published a short story called The Residents of War, and currently in the works writing a new story, what I like to call the adult Magic Treehouse story. But yes, everything you said, Katrina, is very, very important for new authors to understand, because going the self-publishing route, it's accessible in the sense where you have more creative control over your creative property, but it's not in the sense easy in terms of finance, because you have to find your own editor, your own cover artist. You have to figure out, okay, how am I going to plan out my finances for the marketing, for the art teams, for the street teams, for all that stuff. Now, art teams and beta teams necessarily don't have to be paid. That's entirely separate, but maybe depends on the author and their own individual process. But generally, the self-publishing route is expensive or finance heavy, depending on how you want to market your book, because it is a very, very difficult thing. I'm still learning that myself. With my 3rd book coming out, I'm now doing an art team, street team, to get the hype up for it. And that also leads into, now, okay, who am I marketing this to? Who is my audience? And that's a very important thing to understand, viewers and listeners. As I've said numerous times on the show, yes, we write our books for ourselves because we enjoy these stories. But when we make the decision to publish these stories for the public, we have to keep in mind, who are we writing this to and for what genre? So for
Sorry.
you, Katerina, from the 1st book to the 3rd book, did you have an idea of the audience you were writing for? And in your opinion, how important is it for new authors to really understand the audience they're writing for and the genre they're writing for?
This is a very good question. And before I answer it, I'm going to segue it just a little bit, because you mentioned the reading groups and everything. And in order to generate reviews on my Amazon, I sign up. The website, I believe it's called Pubby, PUBBY.co. So it's a very helpful. I highly recommend. It's a website where ultimately you have to read others' books to get points, and then you can use those points for to place your books for review. So it's like it's a very helpful. I strongly recommend it. I've got about probably 100 reviews already for my 3 books, but it also means I had to read about 100 books. right?
Ah,
Because
okay.
ultimately what you do, you pick up somebody else's book, you get certain amount of points, and you know, use those points then to place your book for the review. So to my point, I've read a lot for the last several months while I was using that website, and that actually also gave me a very good idea of what's currently hot, what's currently in the market. And as engaged as I am in my own stories, it made me realize that not necessarily I'm in the hottest genre. For example, alien space romance with explicit content. That goes there like it's a very hot commodity right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of items that I know they're interesting. Or just like switch to another point, like my husband at the beginning of my journey, he told me, jokingly, of course, but he's like, sex and violence, that's what sells. Right about that. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. You know, we have, you know, Games of Thrones, sex and violence, that's what you got. But it's not necessarily what you can do. Even at the beginning of my like first book, I gave it a try to have more like explicit content, and it's just not working for me. I can't do certain things that I can't, right?
Right.
So capturing what exact my target audience would be, it is a difficult journey,
Mm-hmm.
especially since my three books, it feels like the my genre changed a little bit. You know, I had first one, which is a pure fantasy romance. The second one is more of the space sci-fi opera, and the third one is a mix of everything with a little bit of you know, investigation of and detective story. So I like to call my story, actually, this is the keyword, key tag that is capturing the most clicks on Amazon ad, is a sci-fi adventure.
Okay.
So that kind of, and again, you know, I kind of navigate again a different story on Amazon. When you try to push your ads, you have to put certain keywords. So
Yes.
based on the statistics, that particular key phrase, sci-fi adventure, was the most, you know, the most one that generated the most of the impressions and clicks. So that's the genre that I think I'm stuck with. I don't feel comfortable to really change it to reach to the biggest audience, just
Right.
because some of that is just not me. I had people, like I had somebody telling me like, oh, you should add that. You should bring more of the modern world political issues, or bring more of, you know, somebody else said like, bring more of explicit content because that's what sells. You can't just jump over your head and create something that you don't feel like just
Right.
to fit somebody's agenda or apply to more people. So it is still a search within yourself what you want to do, but at the same time you have to be true to yourself, right? You have to be honest with what you can do and what you feel like doing versus to you know, get to the bigger target audience.
Definitely. And actually, what you talked about just now about a reader saying, you know, you should add this, you should add this because this sells, what actually leads into another topic, which we'll get to later, of the business side. But now transitioning from that, as you just mentioned, you read a lot of books that really helped you understand, okay, this is the type of stories, the type of genres that are generating the most capital. So for you, Katrina, what stories would you say have really helped you come to your own as an author, as well as fine tune your characters, their development in the story, their arcs, the narrative style, and the world building? Because as you mentioned in the beginning, as well as from your bio, you were fascinated by the literacy titans growing up, Tolkien and many more. So, are there any authors or books you would like to make a shout out to, and even going forward, film and media that were also integral to the development of your series?
There's so many, but if we're talking about books, I'm still with the classics. Obviously, we can talk about John Rowling with Harry Potter. I consider her one of maybe not necessarily from the literature, but as a skill to build a well-encompassing world with all the questions and all the pieces together. I believe she's amazing, but I'm still going to back, 30, 40 years ago. I can give you one book that just jumps to my head. I was like 13 at that time, and I wrote Asimov's The End of Eternity. Ooh. And it blew my mind, like absolutely, like that whole idea of people being able to live outside of the timeline and change the things within each of the centuries to adjust to certain agenda. It completely blew my mind. I can name so many different, like with Bradbury. Again, everybody usually mentions the those giants like 451 Fahrenheit or Martian Chronicles. For me, Bradbury's short story called I believe, I'm trying because I'm translating in my head. I read it all in Russian back in 40 years ago. I think it's called The Sound of Thunder. It's a short story, describes the butterfly effect. It's a very short story about, somewhere in the future, a company offers the time traveling to the prehistorical time to watch the dinosaurs. The whole point of that story is, you stand on a platform, we travel in the time, you observe the dinosaurs and the prehistorical jungle, but in no way you should step off that platform. So one of the main characters of the story accidentally stepped off, quickly jumped back. They came back into their time and see completely changed, I don't know, nuclear war. I forget already what happened.
Effect.
Yes. So what happened? Yes, the person stepped on the one little butterfly in the jungle and squished that one butterfly. And that caused that ripples in the water all the way to change completely the future and everything. So I was always fascinated by those things, like when you like cause and effect and all those sequences. It's amazing. If we come in more to modern world, I'm a huge geek. I can talk Harry Potter to you. I can talk Star Wars to you. I can talk Lord of the Rings to you. I love MCU. I mean, I love Marvel Universe, and I can talk tons about, comics and everything. So there is so many pieces and so many creations that I kind of pick a little things from to my own ideas. And I'm pretty sure that whoever reads my stories might find, I've heard that somewhere. So there's always similarity. Just like we talk about the music, there's only 7 notes in the music, right?
Right.
What can you create? Same thing with the books. It got to be influenced or inspired by something that already happened to me, right? The point is, how can you add your own something into there? How you can get your own twist or your own cool thing into the story to make it unique? And that's, I think, the struggle. And I guess it's not necessarily a struggle, but it's a goal forward for any author, is how do you make your story interesting, but also so what nobody would say like, yeah, I've read it already so many times, it's just another, she meets him, they fall in love, end of story type of thing. So you want to create something unique.
Definitely. And what you said actually reminds me of something that I used to follow for a long time before I changed. It was called the Writer's Creed. And I learned this from an author who I met, I want to say, probably back in 2014. And it was, writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. We make stuff up, we cheat people out of time, and we steal from one another because the same story has been told numerous times over and over again. And that, viewers and listeners, is true. But as I've grown older and come to my own as an author, I now follow what I like to call the 3 E's: educate, entertain, and enlighten. Because you can do all three in works of fiction and whatever genre that you're writing in. Because yes, we all want to entertain our readers. That is the primary goal, that they have a good story. But that's not necessarily the only thing. We can educate them on topics which mirror the real world but are not explicit to the real world, as well as enlighten people, which, let's face it, some of the great works of fantasy fiction, like uh, Frank Herbert's Dune, or J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, George R. Martin's Game of Thrones, stuff like that. And actually going forward, or actually going back to Frank Herbert's Dune, that is a huge book on educate and enlighten, because I recently just saw the second movie, and it's an interesting character study where we think that Paul Atreides is this hero, but if you really look at the character, he's not really a hero. He is a charismatic individual who goes down this dark path in the guise of being, this great person. And without getting too much into history, I will say this: if you studied history, you can pick out a lot of charismatic leaders in history from ancient to now who have followed similar qualities of Paul Atreides. And that, of course, goes into the next discussion, which is the readership. Who is going to find the most enjoyment out of this? The type of readers. Now, I say this because the reader and the audience is vastly different. We can market to a general audience, but normally the readership is going to be vastly different from our first book to our most current book. And to give an example, I've had two guests on the show, Desiree Proctor and Erica Harrell, who wrote the award-winning graphic novel Nuclear Power, which imagined a 1960s post-apocalyptic America where the Cuban Missile Crisis pretty much started World War III. And the 13 original colonies become the American Union. Pretty much, America becomes the Cuba of that universe. And when they wrote that story, they were writing it for people who enjoyed, action drama, thriller, with those who enjoyed the X-Men from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Comics. What they did not anticipate were people who grew up during that time in the 1960s and realized that could have actually happened. Maybe not so much with the radiation and the mutant powers, but that fear was real, and that was a new readership that they did not anticipate. So for you, Katrina, from your first book to your third book, has your readership gone through a growth, and do you have a better idea of your readership now?
Yes. And ultimately, all my books, they have a very, not unique, but one thing in common. They all face the strong female protagonist. Right. So, and that is ultimately the goal I was trying to achieve, is to show that, yes, of course, with the help of magic or space travel, but women are capable of doing anything and everything that life throws on that. And me, being a very cruel author, throw a lot of difficulties and problems at my heroines. But ultimately, on the first book, I think it was like very idealistic. And so, to the point of the third book, I decided, well, I need to add a little bit of flaws to my characters. Right, there might be not all just strong superheroes, but they have they're making wrong choices, and they sometimes we're all humans. No matter how much power we have, we could make wrong choices, or we can our decisions might not work for the best and such. So with that, I think my audience changed as well, because if the first book was, that's a romance story, yes, it has a lot of fantasy, but at the end is just, will they, will not type of thing. Are they going to be together or not? By the time I reached the third book, I think I brought to the point of it's not always about just black and white and if they're gonna stay together, but it's about the hard choices, the decisions you have to make. So with that, of course, the audience changes. I don't know if it helps me necessarily to reach that target audience because, you know, you advertise it as sci-fi adventure, but not necessarily everybody would be expecting the same thing, right? One expect the adventure with a lot of shooting and, you know, spaceship flyings and all that, but the other thing, adventure is, you know, investigating something or deciphering the code, and it's all part of the adventure, but it's different things. So it's actually hard to find that perfect reader for you and to explain to them what they're going to get when they're reading my books. But this is also a journey for any author to not only tell the cool story, but actually to be able to tell, like, okay, this is what you're going to get when you read this book. So it might not be for you. I'm not going to have a very straightforward romantic story there. I'm not going to have a very straightforward action sequence here. So it's going to be a little bit more of maybe, you know, certain choices, certain ideas. So at the end, I think your target audience is such a dynamic creature, especially if you are still in the process of finding yourself. Like, I mean, if you truly set yourself for the specific genre, that's one thing. But if you are like many people, still trying to find yourself, still trying to find what is that perfect spot where you belong, then your target audience will be changing with that as well, just because, you know, they kind of looking for the things with you along the journey.
Definitely. And now we're actually going to go back to what you were talking about earlier when it came to people saying, you know, your book should have this, your book should have that. And this also goes back to what I brought up, which were the long-term goals of being an author. Because ultimately, I think you definitely agree, Katrina, that for any first-time author, the idea of being, you know, New York Times bestseller or winning like the Pulitzer Prize or any of those awards is enticing for anyone, and wanting to join the hot genres that are, you know, popular. Like in the case for romance fantasy, it is the most read genre in all of the publishing world. It's read 6 times a month more so than sci-fi, fantasy, or even just straight up regular romance. But all of that, I think, is very dangerous to a first-time author because it creates unrealistic goals and expectations, which I learned from a fellow author on the show, Natalie Wright, author of Season of the Dragon, who said this quote: "The biggest lie a new author can believe is that their debut novel is going to be the start of their legacy. The truth is there is no guarantee." Now, there have been exceptions to the rule. There have been authors whose debut novel allowed them to reach award-winning status and live off the success of their first book. I have met an author like that on the show. Shout out to Andy Peliquin of the Dark Assassin series. But on the other side of the coin, you have authors who rise, fall, rise again just a little bit higher, and fall down hard. And at that point, their passion for writing is depleted. They're no longer interested in creating stories. And then that voice of imposter syndrome comes back with a vengeance because it's a lot more apparent. And that, of course, goes back to the long-term goals you set out with of being an author. Did you want to be an author and just create stories and not care about any recognition or the capital you would get? Or did you want to be known as an author, in which case you want people to know who you are, which is, in that sense, you're writing full-time, you're dedicating all your energy to your stories and your series. So for you, Katrina, in your own opinion, how important is it for new authors to really understand that there is no guarantee that your debut anything is going to be the start of your legacy, but it should not deter you from writing and creating stories if that is truly indeed your passion.
That is a perfect point you're making. And this is something that I had to tell to myself. So at first I wrote for myself. Then when I decided to publish, of course you get that feeling like, oh yeah, I'm going to publish and I'm just going to, make it out there.
Right.
And you have to, but you have to tell it in a way that it won't stop you. It won't discourage you.
Right.
But this is something that I kind of kept telling myself. Okay, I don't want to lie. Of course I want to be a well-known author. Of course I want everybody knowing me and, quoting my books or pointing like, oh, you should read that series.
Right.
Of course. But again, that is a hard work. And let's be honest, even those people who choose the path of just being an author, not all of them make it there, right?
Yes.
So that's the thing is, you have a passion for writing, you have all these ideas and thoughts in your head, but it's just not capturing the audience or interest. It happens too. So for new authors, I think it is very important to keep in mind that what you're doing is awesome. Kudos. You're doing great. Don't stop, because we constantly put yourself in certain frames and certain, limitations. No, go ahead, do that. But yes, please don't be discouraged and don't set those unrealistic expectations just because, again, I think I mentioned it at the beginning, the whole world of people absorbing information is changing. People
Yes.
absorbing it visually. They absorb it through short videos rather than spending their time with the long books. So keep all that in mind. And yes, it could be discouraging, and I wouldn't be honest if I said like I every day go and look, do I have another sale, like do I have another review? Oh no, not again. Who's gonna buy my book? So yes, I get that too, but at the same time, I'm looking and I'm seeing 3 books published in Amazon, and that also makes me feel good. Just the fact that it's there, just the fact that I accomplished that, I did it all. It is a very, very stimulating thing too. But yes, you're absolutely right. You have to understand that what you're getting into, I think it goes for pretty much any art. It doesn't matter if you're an author of the literature or you painting pictures or you creating any kind of art. You have a lot to say. You have a lot of things to express. They might not just get there. Somebody can be lucky enough to write a black square and captivate the attention of everybody, but just because you were first.
Right.
Let's think about all those. Just an example, the dystopian young adult stories. It started like with Hunger Games, although one can argue Hunger Games was also a transition of other previous stories. And then you look at all these other dystopian stories that came after Hunger Games, the Divergent, the Maze Runner, all those.
Yes.
And you catch that they tried to do something unique, but they weren't first, so it wasn't as good as the Hunger Games, for example. So
Right.
yes, all those things you really have to keep in mind, especially if you think that you're going to be an author as your sole function, your sole idea of who you are. I'm not like, I have a different profession. I'm an IT business. So it's, I have a job. So this is my hobby. So, and I treat it as not necessarily a hobby, as my passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it generates interest, if I can reach certain people, if I can, spread my ideas, if I can get people to be interested in my books, awesome. It makes me feel good. It makes me even encourages me to create more, or maybe, get more ideas. But it cannot be your sole driver when you're creating something. Again, not because I want to tell other authors like you're not going to be good at it. No, but you need to understand the world we're currently living in, and people's perception of the information that they're getting right now is it changed so much, especially in the last decade, that you really have to be prepared to take a no for an answer, or see that it doesn't generate an interest as you wished for. So maybe change what you wish for. Be just happy with that what you've done.
Nice. And we're now reaching the final end of this amazing interview, Katrina. So I'm going to combine last two questions together as a two-parter. So ultimately for you, where you're at right now in your life with this incredible series, who would you say have been in your corner since the beginning, or who have joined your corner either through social media, you've either met them at a convention, and have really been like your biggest cheerleaders and hype men for you? And also, probably the most important one, because you may have already answered this, but maybe you can add more to it. What is your biggest, most important word of wisdom to fellow authors out there who will be hearing and listening to this for the first time?
My biggest supporter is my husband. Actually, all my 3 books are dedicated to him, and I'm not not ashamed of saying it. He is the love of my life, and pretty much everything I do, I hope that he's next to me. So he is my biggest supporter, and my shoulder, my everything. So I did have a lot of other friends who enjoyed my stories. As I mentioned, I have a friend who reads my books before I even give it to the editor, and she's so involved in it. I couldn't be happier with the feedback that I receive. I also recently, when I joined the Instagram, it's something new for me. I've actually met a lot of authors.
Yes.
It's interestingly, how did I meet most of them, and how, because I started reaching authors myself. And the reason it happened is anybody who tried to advertise their book work through Instagram would probably get bombarded by all those book review channels, tons of them. And of course, I got some of them. I talked to some of them, and being scammed a little bit by several channels, I started reaching to authors who already was on those channels. So I just reached to them directly, asking, okay, you use the services of this or this, how did you like it? And then it's kind of how the conversation started. I met several extremely awesome people, also authors, some already well known. Actually, one of the authors, she's been publishing for quite some time. Her genre is spicy romance, but I actually communicated with her directly, and I've got a lot of good advices. Where to go to put your book for, reading groups, or, what to do. I've met several new authors who also in the same journey as I'm trying to promote the book right now. And those folks are awesome too. And, we can exchange the ideas, exchange the experiences. One of the girls is a young girl, like twice younger than I am. And we seem to, really like click, and we discuss a lot of things, book related or not. So yes, I'm definitely getting more from just publishing experience. I'm meeting new people. I met you, Gabriel, and I'm absolutely enjoying our conversation. And
Thank
I've
you.
been listening to your YouTube videos for the last several weeks since we met, and I'm really enjoying all those videos, and how you get people to open about themselves, about their work. So it is more of just a journey to be a writer. It's meeting new people and getting new experiences, and it's absolutely awesome.
Nice.
So, yeah, to get to what my current plans are, I think I'll just keep writing. I thought I finished the series, and now I have more thoughts in my head. So I'm just going to keep going, irrespectively of am I able to sell the millions, or I just sold 100. It doesn't matter because I still have something to say, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Nice. Very, very nice. So, as like a final endpoint to this incredible interview, what is your word of wisdom to future authors and fellow authors who are watching this video or will be watching this when it releases?
Keep reading. I just say read everything. It's, I'm speaking from the perspective of person whose first language is not English. So for me, it's double the importance. You expanding your language skills, you learning, but it also, it really helps you because you definitely growing with every book. Even if it's a simplistic book, you're learning how different authors create different genres, how they put different ideas. Just keep reading and read as much as possible, because this is just a benefit with really, even if the book was horrible, you just got an experience of, okay, this is what I shouldn't be doing, right? This is not how not to write. But my word wisdom is don't get discouraged, keep reading. And as soon as you feel like you have that urge, you have that idea in your head that you just go and jump. I write my books. Sometimes I write it in a carpool lane when I wait my son to pick up from school. I keep writing on my phone. I just have a couple of paragraphs to put there. Keep reading, keep writing, and enjoy what you're doing. It doesn't have to be your job. It doesn't have to be your responsibility. It has to be enjoyment of the process. It has to be fun.
Beautiful. Beautifully said and beautifully ended. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing author interview here on the channel. A huge thank you to Katrina for coming out on the show and telling us about her journey, her books, and what we can expect from her in the future. Katrina, thank you so very, very much. Where can people find and engage with you on social media, and where can people purchase copies of your books?
So I'm both in Instagram and I'm on Facebook, Katrina Zari. You can find all my books published on Amazon. You can find them on Barnes and Nobles, Goodreads. So everywhere there is a website, Katrina Zari Books, that you can also find all the information about me. I'm very happy if somebody can want to reach me through the social media. Very happy to talk. Social media, as scary and creepy sometimes it could be, it also brings a lot of great connections and great interactions. So you're welcome on my page. We'll be happy to talk.
I will link all of down below in the description of this video. Please go and check out Katrina's page, as well as make sure to buy a copy or two of Katrina's books. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another author interview here on the channel. If you've been subscribed to my newsletter, been following me since the beginning of June, I have my final guest lined up, which I am so excited to share with you all. And as another important update regarding the launch of Michael, Last Angel of Earth, the last days of the edits are almost finished. So hopefully, maybe sometime early July, the link for the pre-order will be up, and possibly the link of the ARC applications will be up the week prior. But we'll just have to wait and see. So be up to date with my posts on Instagram as well as my posts on LinkedIn. Again, a huge thank you to Katrina for joining us today. And thank you also very much for the subscriptions, for the likes, for the shares. It really means a lot to me. And until next time, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, asking you all to like and subscribe and comment down below. And until next time, have a wonderful day.